webinar. This is obviously the January 2025 webinar for our certified firm folks. As always, attendance with this live webinar will allot you and your crew 1 hour of continuing education credit. And you also get some fantastic information from some industry professionals. So we have a few of those industry professionals on our panel today to help go over the new S700 fire standard. Millie Washington will be kicking things off. Millie's been with the IICRC how long now? 10 plus years, Millie?
14 years.
14. Yeah, I wasn't sure the exact number. She's been with the IICRC for a very, very long time. She is the queen of standards, and she'll kick us off into the next portion of the webinar. Anybody who has any questions, any of our attendees, if you have questions, you can type them into the chat box, and at the very end, I will ask the questions for our presenters, and we'll go from there. And I give it to you, Millie.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Gavin. Welcome to everyone to this very first webinar of the year. We will get started in just a minute or so with our speakers. I will introduce our two speakers for today. But before that, as Standards Director, it would be remiss if I did not provide you with just a quick update on what's coming up, what we have just completed in terms of standards development, and sort of just give a quick overview of that. So Gavin, if you can advance to the next slide, please. The first thing that I want to mention is the two standards that we have very recently published. Of course, the second one is the topic of our discussion today, the ANSI IICRC S700 2025 standard for professional fire and smoke restoration. We'll do a bit of a deep dive on that one. And then the other one that I want to highlight is also the ANSI IICRC S520 2024 standard for professional mold remediation. This was a revision, and we published a red line version along with this revision, which is something that IICRC is committed to doing for all future revisions of our standards, to publish a red line version accompanying the revised standard itself. Next slide, please, Gavin. And then just a quick update on what you can expect in this coming year, 2025. We are expecting to have 3 additional standards published as ANSI IICRC standards. These are all being developed or revised as American national standards. That's the S300 Professional Upholstery Cleaning Standard. The last version was an IICRC standard back in 2000, and we're working to have that published this year. In addition to the 300, we have the S410, which is the standard for infection control during professional cleaning and maintenance of the commercial built environment. And then the S900, which is the standard for professional remediation of precursors, drug residues, and associated chemical waste. So these are 3, summer 2025, late summer, something like that. I would expect them. We are expecting a second limited public review for the S410 and the S900 to take place in February. So please keep an eye out for that and submit public review comments if these are areas of interest to you. Next slide, please. And this is just an overview of some of the other standards that we are currently working on. I won't read this whole list. You have it in front of you. For more information on each individual standard, you can visit our website, iicrc.org/standards, and you'll get information on where each of these standards is in their development or revision process. But just a summary to just give you an idea of all the many things that are happening, many projects in IICRC standards. We are excited for the future, for so many new and revised standards to be published. And as an organization, we thank our volunteers. Without you, we would have no standards. So a big, huge thank you. And with that, I would now like to put you out of your misery, and I'm going to introduce our speakers for today. Next slide, please, Gavin.
It gets out of place, Millie.
Oh, it is out of place.
Yeah.
Well, if you can skip ahead to maybe
I want to
slide.
come back to that, though, after we're done introducing
Yeah,
you.
we can come back.
There we go.
There's Bran. Okay, so I'm going to introduce our speakers, Bran Lynch and John Pletcher, for today's webinar. Bran Lynch has been the restoration restoration industry for more than 25 years and has always enjoyed the ever-changing daily challenges that come with it. He prides himself in his abilities and willingness to jump into any given project as chief cook or bottle washer. Bran is the current chair of the S700 consensus body. John Pletcher has spent 40 years in the disaster restoration industry as owner, operator of RestoreTech for 34 of those 40 years. He joined RIA, at that time ASCR, in 1996 and was mentored by Marty King for over 20 years. John went on to participate in RIA's FS2 guideline from 2013 to 2019 and became the second vice chair of FS2 in January of 2017. John has been the vice chair of the S700 consensus body from 2019 through the end, which is now. And I think most importantly, John was the recipient of the RIA Martin L. King Award in 2022. And with that, I will hand it over to you, Bran and John.
Thank you, Millie. So I guess we can go back to that slide. That was
Thanks for having us. Thanks for having us. This has been a long road to get to where we are. So we're kind of excited. So go ahead, Bran.
Yeah, we're kind of excited. So the first thing that John and I wanted to do when we were considering putting this together was to just give some historical context for exactly how long and how much work has gone into this thing, and how long there's been so many folks throughout the years that have, had input and tried to get this thing off the ground, and through various organizations, we've managed to get some stuff out there. So this is the first ever published standard. There have been guidelines before, as you can see there. The MITR RIA was 1997 for fire and smoke damage repair. That's kind of a collectibles item now. John has that on his bookshelf.
You can still buy them.
Yeah. Okay. And the roots to this actual document goes back to FS1 Fire Standard 1 in 2012 and Fire Standard 2 in 2014. I was also part of the Fire Standard 2 development. It just never got published. Then luckily, or by happenstance, or however, it was certainly a lot of work. In 2019, RIA and IICRC developed a strategic partnership to develop standards, amongst other things. And that was really the genesis of how we got to where we are today with the release of this standard. And we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about some of the folks that, really put a whole lot of time and effort and broke a lot of ground for us all. Marty King and Rusty, Cliff, Pete, Larry, Lee King, and so many more that, we could have, we could spend 30 minutes just going through a list of all the folks that, these shoulders that the industry, these giants that the industry was built on.
Yeah, let me just add a couple of things, Bran, is that we're showing you the guidelines that Marty wrote and published in 1997, which was really considered the de facto fire standard, even though it wasn't published as a standard. It's more of an instructional, informative guideline. And I want everyone to know that FS2 was really based on this document, and so was the S700. We really borrowed heavily from this document, and I want to, everyone who doesn't know who Marty King was, you need to know he passed away in 2015. He was an industry pioneer. Pete Consigli likes to say, if there's a Mount restoration of presidents' faces, Marty would be on one end, and of course Cliff would be in there too, and a couple other people that have been instrumental in pioneering our industry. They called Marty the igniter of an industry. I think Cliff designated that. So we need to designated that. We need to recognize that a lot of this writing that you're going to read when you read this document is not new. It's updated and adopted from this guidelines, it's a great document, and I think the standard does it justice. So I just wanted to point that out. And we're not saying this was all coming out of the CB's head. A lot of this came from this document. It was really heavily leaned on.
Yeah, we had a roadmap.
Yeah. And then, you know, when Fire Standard 2, back to what Brand said, when Fire Standard 2 kind of just sat on the shelf, it was a done document. And before we partnered up with IICRC RIA, it was, we used that same format, basically, that we had to create the sections for the 700, even though they got tweaked a little bit. For example, the FS2 document did not have a section on contents. And we're going to talk about that later, but we added a section on contents, and that, you know, based on what we thought was a real need to have one. And so it's a little different, but it's basically the same thing. And a lot of the people that were on the consensus body for FS2 participated in this. Once we read their names, we can probably point them out. So anyway, did we want to do that, Millie? Do we want to recognize?
Let's move on.
Yeah.
So the consensus body members included Rodney Harris, Brad Kovar, Ed Light, Dave Mason,
Next slide. Thank you.
Scott McFadden, Dave Robbins, Chris Rosnowski, Josh Smith, Greg Weatherman, Mehmet Yukar, Lawrence Wymet, Cliff Zlotnick. And all really, really great help.
Yeah, and Rodney,
this, you know,
Rodney Harris and Dave Robbins were also on FS2 and on FS1 as well. So these guys have been doing this a long time.
Yeah.
As well as me and Brand.
Yeah, go ahead, John, take this one.
Okay, when we got the ideas, we're thinking about how we're going to start this document, what we're going to talk about, what was our goals and objectives in writing, getting a standard out there. And everybody who's on the call here understands what a standard of care is. I hope so. So, you know, this is how standards are written. They're not meant to be instructional. They're not meant to be informative. They're meant to be, what is the prudent restorer person that's out there doing this work doing every day? So what we try to do is capture that in the practices and procedures that restorers are doing these days, and put it into writing and have it in a document that it can be used in our industry, hopefully for the help the restorer. And that was our second goal. We wanted to put enough information in here that someone who reads this would go, hey, wow, this is a really technical job description here that we're talking about, a job that people are doing and helping people out there who've had terrible things happen to them with fires and such. So we wanted to talk about, and there are several chapters in here where we really think that we've enhanced the impression that people have of the restoration people in this. We're not just janitors and mop and bucket guys. And then we did not want to fall into a trap that we had back with the 520, where we got involved in a lot of sampling and testing and stuff like that. What I would say is that if anybody wants to read this document, please start with the foreword, which is like on page 6 when you open the document. I know I just got mine in the mail yesterday, so it's I know they're out there coming. Really, I guess they're people could buy them now, but we want the readers to read the foreword first, and talks about a lot about how we established the what we wrote about, how we came to write what we did. So that mold is gold thing, we wanted to avoid having to do. We're basically these principles that we decided to use for how we wrote the document are what we're using for standard of care. We don't get involved with testing. Only in the presence or absence disputes or disputes among other MIPs and things like that. So that's where that next bullet goes, to sets the guidelines for third-party involvement. We talk about that, and we're not saying it's not important. And certainly in certain situations, in certain kind of settings, schools, hospitals, yeah, of course. I mean, we're talking about the average household internal fire, where we can use our testing and our skills and what we know to establish the levels and the boundaries of the damage. And it goes into describe that very clearly in the assessment, the foreword section of the standard. So I would asking everybody to read that. We've also put some language in here that we hope is going to help when restorers get confronted with objections from insurance companies about charging for this and charging for that. I mean, we want to, if we can set it as a standard of care, we might stand a better chance of winning those arguments. I know that a lot of managed repair programs have very strict guidelines on what people can do and what they can't do and what they can charge for and that kind of thing. And we want to kind of try to turn that table a little bit and give the level the playing field for the restorer to go back. Yeah, but it says in the standard this, you know. So we'll go into that as we start talking about the sections. But that's all I have to say on the objectives.
Yeah, I just have a little color to add to that. When John mentioned when the 520 first came out, I think that document when it first came out was just kind of misinterpreted by a whole lot of folks, and they used it for their own enrichment. Which you know, if you've been around long enough, you can remember what that was like. And we tried to not let that happen. We tried to write the document for restorers and keep it within that guardrail.
Next slide, please.
So real quick, it's just the table of contents. I'm not going to read it to you because we're going to touch with each of those as we go through this. But like John said, the forward is and you'll hear it probably at least one more time on this call. It's a very important section of this document. We spent a lot of time on that, full knowing that it wasn't going to be in part of the standard. We just really felt that there was a lot of stuff that just kind of needed to be captured and put down on paper for restorers and for, like John said, for the general public and for other ancillary industries that kind of work around, fire restoration. So section 1 is FSD, restoration contractor qualifications.
Fire and smoke
damage.
There,
right? Yeah.
So made an acronym out of that.
Yeah, and John kind of talked about this earlier. Just he touched on it. So what makes a restorer different from your average janitorial company, or just somebody that says, oh yeah, I'm a GC, I can clean that up. There's a whole lot of discussion about what makes restored uniquely qualified to do this work, and how you get those qualifications, what that looks like, and the path you need to take. It doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen in 2 weeks. It's a process, and it's a journey to become a qualified restorer.
Yeah, we list the different courses people can take and certifications they can get, and you can see some of them here. The IICRC's FSRT, and then you have the Certified Restorer Program, which is a little bit, they're updating it now at RIA. It's called the Fire Loss Specialist now. These are very advanced programs, and I think that also we have to rely on our experience in this industry quite a bit. There's and you get experience from doing this work successfully. And what I mean by that is, did you remedy the situation? Does the house smell like smoke still, or is it how, our criteria for is client acceptance is whether the job was done correctly or not. I think when there's problems, people have odors that return after the work's been done, or they persist, they can't get taken care of. This is what this document really talks about, is what we can do to make this a successful project for restorers out there. The one of the things, if you read section 1, there's a section called 1.10, which is a kind of a breakdown of who's qualified, what is a restorer and what is not a restorer. And we talk about qualified restorers versus restoration contractors versus non-restoration. I mean, the difference that are between them, and that's what separates us in this industry. And so the implication here is, for you certified firms out there, is that we're saying that unless you have done this work yourself satisfactorily and achieve the results that you were looking for, which is client acceptance, I'm not sure anyone else would be qualified to write a restoration work plan. We have these days we have Xactimate and these other tools out there, estimating tools that give adjusters the ability to create what's a professional looking estimate of repairs. But we're saying there's more to it than just, hitting the right code or calling it like it is. The assessment and the knowing how to remove the residues, knowing how to remove the odors. This is all very important. And I think that, if you're not qualified to do that, why are you doing it? So I think, back in the day, and some of us old guys out there have been doing it a long time. Before this estimating software was here, the adjusters needed us. They needed us to make their insurance claims relevant, their payments relevant to their policyholders. They didn't know how to do this. So that's the takeaway from section 1, is that there is a difference, and I think we need to know that. And if the people that read this document say, hey, what about this? So it's
Yeah,
a very significant section.
and the other big takeaway is the levels of severity there. So the CB had quite a long discussion about how do we want to start talking about levels of fire severity. And we went back and forth for a little while on, do we assign numbers to it, like some of the other standards have done. But then we kind of came back around to the realization that we already have that, right? We already used language for light, moderate, heavy, and severe. So we just kind of enforced that and said, yeah, that's the colloquial way that we all talk about it. And then we just kind of gave it some definition and made it a little more, you read this definition, you can really kind of understand what light is, what moderate is, what heavy is, and what severe is, just in terms of what you're seeing, smelling, and experiencing in that fire location.
How about the next slide, please? Okay. This is
go ahead, John.
Okay, Brian. This is where this is a cover your assets section. We want to make sure the restorers protect themselves. They talk about what kind of insurance they should have. They do have the type of agreements they use. I know anybody knows Ed Cross, the restoration lawyer. They know that he's pushing this stuff really hard. We introduced the restoration work plan. We call it the RWP. We don't use the word scope of work, and it's for a variety of reasons. But probably the meat of this document is we talk about the importance of documentation, and everybody who does this kind of work understands that a picture says 1,000 words, and I don't think you can take enough pictures in this business. I mean, but it even talks about documenting odors, which is we'll leave that up to the readers to read how we do that. But there is a way to do it. It's about taking samples and keeping them in airtight containers. So it's really kind of a boring section, but it does. I guess the takeaway is that you can't do enough documentation. It's better to be more than less.
Two things as we introduced the MIPs, right? The materially interested parties, and that's we do have a list.
Yeah, identify who they are.
Yeah, that it's one of those can include but is not limited to lists, which we really got accustomed to. So and like John said, if you can't have too much documentation in any job. We all know that. You've been around long enough, you know that.
Moving on, next one. This was really took a long time to write, this assessment section, and I think we're having a similar problem in the 320. This is so important. It's where to look. What are we doing? What is the restorer doing here? If fire has a way of moving through a house, very, very unique ways of going into pressurized areas between walls and cavities and things like that. And if you don't, and that's what these pictures are showing. I mean, you can walk in a room and if you see that kind of smoke coming out behind that switch plate, you're going to go, oh my God, how did that get there? Well, it came from behind it. And the same thing with this wall we've opened up, and we've got a piece of blackened insulation in the wall, but the room itself doesn't look like it's affected. So you put on your estimate to wipe the walls down that room, and you come back and you've got an odor. Well, because what have we missed? We've missed where the odor source is, which is behind the drywall. So this is kind of the meat and potatoes of assessment. It talks about the stages, the different types of assessments. I mean, it's a very lengthy section.
It is. We talk about origins of where the fire started. We talk about particle types, residues, visual and textural characteristics, odor characteristics. I mean, it's we talk about dry smoke and wet smoke, and there's a whole lot of information in here.
But that takes me to the first bullet there, Brandon. I think probably the bonus of this standard is we were allowed to put an appendix in the back. I know the original 500 S500 had a field guide, reference guide, sorry, and it's actually bigger than our standard, but we wrote a section. I mean, there was the consensus body. When I say we, everybody who's on the call, we're talking about the whole consensus body. We're not talking about me and Brand and Cliff and Rodney and people like that. It's the whole consensus body, and we wrote a section called Restoration Theory. It's Appendix A, and in the foreword, I'm going back to the foreword. We say in Appendix A, please read that before you read the standard, and I think people, particularly people who aren't in this industry and don't have a lot of experience as restorers, there's a wealth of information in there. That is our informative guide to getting through this standard. So you'll understand what we say when we're talking about wet smoke or plastic fire or stuff like that. And it's in the back of the document. It wasn't part of the standard, so it did not go out for public review and comments. So no one's really seen it yet. But when you get the standard, we're asking people in the forward to please read that first and then come back and read the standard, because it's going to make a lot more sense.
Yeah.
This is the first standard. Correct me if I'm wrong, this is the first standard that IIC's published that has photographs in it. And when I got the standard yesterday, I opened it up, my heart kind of sank a little bit because the pictures were in black and white. But I get it. Printing would have been a little bit more expensive to have them in Technicolor. So,
Yeah,
but you lose a little bit without the color.
One of the other things that we accomplished here was, early on we started talking about what is restoration and what is reconstruction. At what point do you get through the, when you draw the line between the restoration phase and the reconstruction phase? And we talk about the various phases within the restoration phase, starting with, the emergency services and going all the way through the, project completion, which, is the satisfactory completion. Of course, we talked about, go ahead.
No, I'm saying that I was just saying Marty used to say restoration begins with demolition and ends at reconstruction, not begins at reconstruction, ends there.
Right.
Because we're doing the cleaning and the deodorization and getting the place free and clear of odors and residues. So
yeah, and then you couldn't write any, have any discussion about fire damage without talking about pre-existing conditions.
Mm-hmm.
And then we went around and around and around on this, and it's a very difficult subject, and there was a lot of, I don't want to say heated, but there was a lot of great input when it came to pre-existing conditions, and I think we did a pretty nice job. We spent a lot of time on it, kind of trying to get our arms around it. I'm not sure anybody is ever going to get their arms completely around it, but we tried to define it as, put some guardrails up and define it as best we could.
And back to the boundaries of the damage. We have back in Appendix A, the restoration theory. We really go in depth about how the smoke gets distributed in a house fire, how it goes from room to room, what happens when it's hot, what happens when it cools. I mean, there's all kind of information in there, and I think that's one of the things that really separates us from somebody who doesn't do this work is we have to know where to look. We can use our nose, we can use our clients' noses, but we have to, if we don't see it, we have to be, okay, where would, if I was a fire, where would I go? Where would the smoke go? So that's discussed at great length in Appendix A. Yeah.
And then of course, test cleaning, we've all been there, done that. But we go into, what it should look like, what you might think about using and how that process should work. To make it so that it's as accurate as possible to do an in-house or on-site testing to try to get the best end results of everything getting cleaned up.
How about the next slide? This is kind of a really short section. We're really just kind of separating what is a piece of equipment, what is a tool, what is a material, and this has to do with more about how people price their work, whether they use unit pricing or they use in software pricing, or they use time and rate materials, how you want to call it, time and materials, and how what would be considered a tool, what would be considered a piece of equipment. So we give examples. and that's really all that's about. It's not, what we found again is that, some of these, third party management, claims management things want to, curtail charging for different pieces of equipment, or for moving blankets or trucks or things like that. We try to talk about that in here a little bit. Say you can go back to them and say, hey, but the standard says this is a tool, this is a piece of equipment, a piece of material. We need to charge for it. Anyway, we're hoping that's what happens. We can move on.
Yeah, it's like you said, it's a short. It is what it is. Here's what tools are. Here's what equipment is, and here's what materials are.
Next slide. Yeah. This is mitigation, stabilization of the building. We just want to emphasize how important this is. You have a very narrow window of time between when the fire happens and the firemen are done, to get in and get out and try to do what you can to make this place a more of a safe place to be. We want to talk about ventilation. We talk about using air scrubbers, getting
Priorities and different priorities residentially or commercially, and what those are, because no two are going to be alike. So you need to kind of talk those through with the folks that are there.
And people that do this work, they understand that certain fire residues are acidic, and we want to address dealing with corrosion issues, up front if it's not too late. I mean, it happens pretty quick, but those, and certainly moisture damage, and where we refer people back to the 500. But
yeah, there's a short discussion on asbestos and lead, full knowing that this is not a safety document, which is kind of an awareness, just kind of a mention of that these things are out there and you need to be aware of them.
And we also mention the fact that, if subrogation is a possibility here, we want to make sure that the restorers understand, and those areas, if they suspect an area where the fire originated, need to stay out of those areas, and that's important to cover.
Yeah. And then protecting contents and containment, so that you're not spreading it where it didn't go. And then improving environmental conditions, humidity control, and that kind of stuff.
Next slide, please. Oh, that's just another picture. It's the same house, actually. We can go on. Go to section 6, please. Yeah. I think that we called this section source removal because it's more than cleaning. It's like we said, it's demolition. It's using abrasive processes such as media blasting and things like that. So it's not just cleaning. But it is accomplishing the same thing. We're getting, everybody knows what that is. That's our world famous chem sponge, even though there's no chemical in it, it's pure rubber. But it does a great job removing surface soot and stuff. So with this section is really what are restorers using? What are we doing? How do detergents work? What is
the wet methods, dry methods, gentle methods, aggressive methods,
starting with the gentle, moving on to more aggressive means until you get the results you're looking for, when that kind of stuff. So it's a great section. Section 6 is a lot of meat and potatoes here. Once we start talking about the methodologies, how this work gets done, that's where we're getting into the meat of this standard of care.
Yeah, and one other thing that John mentioned this earlier, that we do discuss, that oftentimes is a combination of a dry and a wet process.
Most times it is, yeah.
Yeah, so that I think that goes kind of back to what John was saying earlier, that oftentimes insurance companies are not happy about hearing you have to clean it twice. And
and we also talk about
sometimes you do.
Yeah, and we have to understand too that even after, like this gentleman who's cleaning the ceiling, it's not going to be perfect. We're going to get the smoke off, but it's going to be smeary or whatever staining. So we have repair projects. We have to talk about, can it be cleaned so it could be repaired, saved? Is it, or is it heat damaged? What is the problem here? This is what we do. We try to save some money for the insurance companies by cleaning stuff so it can be reused. So we clean it, we talk about, how to make sure we have the odor managed, and then we can go on to doing finishes such as refinishing or repainting or reupholstering, things like that.
Yeah.
Next slide. Oh, that's some more pictures.
Great before and after.
There's some media blasting, folks. I mean, this is, if anybody that's not doing media blasting really ought to think about it. It's an amazing process. It's mostly used on wood, unfinished wood, but it also does work on masonry and concrete. Next slide.
So section 7, we need to give it special thanks to Tom Yacobelis. We brought him in kind of as a special guest to help with that. And anybody that knows Tom knows that this is what his career, his life has been. So we brought him in, and then the spinoff from this section was the S700, which was released in record time. Tommy got it done. But the beautiful part about it, when we brought Tommy in, and he, because of his years of relationships within the industry, he was able to kind of bring NADCA on board and get them to waive off on everything that we're saying, and everything that was in the standards, both standards. So it really was a great thing to bring him on board and to get him to do this. And it's a big thank you to Tommy for helping push this one through.
And one of the things is, now that there's a 590, this first edition of our standard is going to have this section, but in future editions, it's probably going to be removed and just refer people to the 590.
Yeah, and then that last bullet there is a pretty important bullet. When you're talking about an HVAC system, or it is the air side only, the conditioned air side only is what duct cleaning is involved with. The outside of the duct, falls back on the restorer.
Yeah. And there's a lot of discussion about that in there. Who's responsible for what? And obviously, a lot of people subcontract duct cleaning. Some people do it themselves, but there is a distinction between an air side surface and then the exposed surfaces, exterior surfaces that often the restorers end up doing the cleaning on those, particularly in ceiling bottoms.
Big takeaway from that chapter is that after a fire event, that the system needs to be assessed by a qualified HVAC assessor, and it speaks to who is qualified to do that, within the chapter.
And the bonus here is these. Tommy made some flow charts to show how the assessment follows a path of thinking. What are we going to do next? Does this a yes, no? It's kind of a decision tree flow chart. It's really cool. You can see how these guys think when they're looking at these systems. So next slide. Okay, we shouldn't have gone to this picture, Millie, but that's okay. This is the odor. We didn't call it deodorization because we've been bouncing that term around forever. It's odor management. I mean, sometimes you just can't get it, so particularly in fires when you have a really, really strong odors, but and you can't take a picture of an odor, so we had to go to this route. But it's really well written. It's got a lot of great information of different types of deodorization.
It talks about characteristics of odors, how to do inspections,
how to isolate the odors.
Right.
Yes, and the different, oxidation, gaseous oxidation. We're talking about ozone and how to use it when it's appropriate. And then
odor counteractants. I mean, it's really quite.
Yeah, we go back to this is not new stuff, but there is new stuff coming out, and we all want to be careful with advertising these miracle deodorization products when they claim they're safe. And we did some research on some stuff here. We decided we couldn't put this in the document because there's no data to support that it's safe for people to be around while these machines are running. So we're kind of careful about that in here. So there's more on this in the appendices. C2 has a big section on it. So again, then there we can get a little bit more instructional. So anyway, and persistent fire odors, back a second. I mean, this is a big thing that Marty made a living on here. People would call him after they were done with the job and said, we just can't get the smoke out, Marty. People still smell it. And he would come out to the house and he'd put plastic up on walls and create these odor containment areas. And sure enough, he'd find something that was missed. And, he would say that, persistent odors are either because the area was not addressed, it wasn't cleaned properly, or what you're seeing here, the sealer that was applied wasn't applied properly and in a sufficient quantity to do its intended purpose, which is to create a barrier for a transmission of odors off the surface. All right, next slide. So again, we didn't have going back to what we said earlier, we didn't have a contents section in FS2, so we decided to have one. in this section because we wanted to have a comprehensive standard. So it's quite lengthy, and it goes into everything that really the assessment. It almost treats it like it's its own standard because it's we didn't know that people who might purchase this standard might just be interested in the contents. You know, there's a lot of contents companies out there doing this work. They may not read all the section on assessment, so we put some stuff in there about the assessment and the removal, when to do it. You know, the window, again, the window of time is not great. Sometimes in fire you have to get on it, particularly if you're doing a pack out, which I know a lot of companies do. How do you handle that contents before you get it out of the house? So you don't make matters worse. It's again, it's very in depth.
Yeah, we spent a lot of time on identification and classification of contents.
And getting the restores to, you know, really say, hey, am I qualified to do this? I mean, there's a lot of, you know, a house is a house. You know, you get a finite number of square footages of drywall and flooring and windows, and in contents, it's a whole mixed bag. You can have, you know, antique grandfather clocks and tall case clocks, period furnishings and oil paintings and all kind of stuff that you really you almost need a specialized expert on. That's what we talk about. You need a specialized expert. Don't take on something that you don't know what you're handling. So that's we talk about that a lot in there. It's a good section.
Okay, go ahead. So
every
go ahead.
section every section has a talk about, you know, when are we done? You know, what's the post restoration job looking like, and how do we know that we're done? But here we kind of go back and summarize it. And what we found out is that, you know, if you're not done, it's usually because something, again, we're dealing with something that's a little bit out of the ordinary, and what can we do to solve it, particularly odors. I think anybody does firework knows that odors are probably the biggest thing. So we spend a lot of time talking about doing different types of testing, isolation with plastic.
Yeah, evaluations and clearance criterias, and what to do if, you know, how to do a blind test and what that means, and, you know, how to treat it if only one person says it still smells. And so there's some great discussion on just, you know, odd situations like that.
I mentioned earlier about documenting odors, and this is one way to do it. This is a patch testing type of thing. It's been done in the industry. It's using you're trying to transfer an odor onto one surface to another, and it's very helpful. And I think that people will that aren't using it, that maybe somebody else is using it, you're not using it. Think about it, because it can be very helpful when you have problems.
Very good tool to have in your toolbox for sure.
All right, then we have the last one is section 11, which is, I think this is kind of just boilerplate for IICRC standards. Anybody who's written a standard or has standards and knows there's a section in there on this, and we just really talk about how it affects the job here. We don't go into give examples. I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds of examples of these. We'd be writing, you know, multiple pages on, you know, what to look for, but if you can anticipate them, great. Sometimes they don't come up until you're in the middle of the project. So it gives you some, you know, what are restorers doing when this happens? Okay, it's very short, it's 1 page long, but I think it says it all. I think that's it, Millie.
I think that's it. Yeah, look at that, right on time. So the takeaways, I think we've touched on these. You know, it's a standard of care. It's not an educational document. You know, it's not meant to be like a teaching document. It is certainly informative. It gives best practices. It does not give state of the art. You know, it's not talking about, oh, there's this new, you know, the laser machine that's out there now. That's, you know, I don't know how many people are doing that. It just hasn't gotten there yet. Forward and appendices are just as important. We've mentioned that a few times. You know, we had great collaboration with the RIA and IICRC and NADCA for that matter. It's been 12 years in the making with, you know, some industry pioneers starting us down this path. And you know, every time we went back and took a look at it, we realized, oh, we could say that better, or we left this out, or, you know, this section needs massaging. We had to catch ourselves, and Millie really helped with this. Was like, no, we're not going back, we're going forward. So, John and I and the whole CB fully realizes that it already needs to be updated.
But you have to stop somewhere. We never get it.
You have to stop.
That's right. Yeah. Okay, we'll turn it back over to you guys.
All right. Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to help us with this. We did have a comment and 2 questions to fire off to you. So, first comment from Scott Armour says there was a misrepresentation of the S20. It was said that it was about sampling and testing, and it is not. And he wanted to just correct on the information.
Yeah, I think I addressed that. I think it was misinterpreted by some when the early editions came out. It was misinterpreted, and they took it. Some folks who had ulterior motives took it where it didn't need to go.
Gotcha. And then Cliff Zlotnick has a couple of questions here as well. Brandon, John, which section in your opinion, will be the most beneficial for the restorer, and why do you feel that way?
Oh,
You want to take that, Brandon? Yeah, I think I think that the most important section isn't in the standard. It's the restoration theory in Appendix A. Personally, sorry,
that
Cliff.
wasn't the question, John.
Cliff helped write that. He was very instrumental in writing that. But I think probably the assessment section.
I think assessment, yeah.
And then deodorization, because that's always a tough one for people. Because we are battling odors, all the different types of materials that we deal with, particularly on contents, like leather and stuff. But
yeah,
hidden odors, and when you have someone that smells something, you don't smell it. What do you do then?
Yeah, and I would say if I didn't know there was a 320, that the content section it's a really great section.
Yeah. But again, we also talk about psychological stuff, like what happens with odors that you don't smell. What matters to the restorer is that you got to get paid, right? I mean, you want to get paid for your work. So if you get a customer that says, "Hey, I still smell it," and you don't, what do you do? I mean, you have to take them seriously. You have to address it. You can't just walk away, particularly if you want to get paid. So
Good question, Cliff.
we talk about that and how to deal with that, and there's people like Cliff that you could certainly call on and see, or someone else in the industry. Marty used to do it all the time. Anybody who's out there doing this kind of work can say, we can help you with that if you're not sure. So it's those are probably the 2 most important. Assessment is so important because we're setting the boundaries, we're setting the levels. We're writing the RWP. We're basing on what we found, and what is
yeah. If you get off on the wrong foot from the beginning, then it's never going to recover well.
Yeah. How are we going to start with? And everybody knows about sponging walls and washing and then rinsing, and it's just smoke damage restoration is not easy. It's difficult, and it's to do it correctly, and it has to be done correctly. But we want most people to say that, and one of the things that's really cool about the restoration theory is we show some pictures of some patterns of deposition of smoke on walls that looks kind of scary when you see it. Everybody knows what the smoke webs are. They see them up in the corners of the room. That's a plastic fire kind of thing. And there's patterns that develop where you can see the nails in the wall and the framing members against the drywall. We explain all that and why that happens, and it's a visual thing more than anything. It's not any I would say damage, other than there's a greater concentration of fire residue particles on those nails and framing members based on temperature and attraction, magnetic attraction and things like that. But some people walk in and say, "Oh, we got to take all the drywall out of this house," when you really don't. You could clean it. You could sponge it and wash it, and they could paint it. You're done. And I think there's a lot of misconceptions in our industry, and a lot of people get particularly homeowners when they don't understand. So it's about education too. I mean, part of the restorer's job is to teach their client, how we're gonna do this, and hopefully the standard will help them. And if they have to carry it with them and show them and say, "Hey, it says right here."
Yeah. Good question, Cliff.
Cliff has another question.
Cliff only gets one.
I think he's testing you guys. How will the standard improve or change your service business?
I have to let John do that one.
Well, I think that there might be some stuff in here that if you're out there doing this work and you've had some level of education, you've had some level of experience, but not a ton. What you're reading is probably, I don't know, Cliff, 400 years of combined experience between all the
Right.
people that are doing this stuff. I mean, I know I'm old. Cliff and I are old guys. We've been doing this a long, long time. And Marty, of course, I mean, he started this industry back in the 70s. So it's
Yeah.
what you're gonna do is you're gonna hopefully have your business is gonna be more efficient. Um, you're gonna win some of these battles with insurance companies. I hope that was a big part of it. We want to keep our industry in our control. In other words, we don't want someone else. I'm not going back to the 520 necessarily. We don't need someone to come in and tell us how to do our job. We don't need someone who doesn't have the level of experience and knowledge that we have doing this work day in and day out to come and tell us how to do what we know
Yeah.
how to do.
I'd like to think, and we were very, very uh, aware when we used, the trigger words as we were writing this. What I would like to think is that any restorer that's been in the business for any amount of time is going to pay attention to those shoulds and course correct to stay within the guardrails of those shoulds, because that's where you need to be.
Awesome. And Patrick Thompson asks, is IH testing becoming more popular on fire losses?
I would say that it's popular in wildfire. It's popular in when there's disputes and in hospital settings and schools and food service industry and for the residential fire, no, it's not. I think we have
Special situations,
special
it's always,
situations.
it hasn't changed.
I
But
think basically when there's a dispute, let's say you go out and you're called by your insurance company, gives your name out or whatever. People call you out of the Google, they do a Google search and find you and you go out and write your estimate. This is we're using tried and true practical methods of determining the presence or absence of fire residues
and removing it in a safe manner.
and when somebody disputes that, then maybe you want to think about getting someone out there to do some testing. I mean, you're going to have the ultra sensitive client who thinks the sky is falling on them, and you got to get just knock the house down and start over. Well, I'm sorry, insurance doesn't work that way. That's going from A to Z with skipping B through W. You got to go through. There's a lot of letters in between A and Z.
Yeah, and my anytime anybody talks about doing testing, I always say just be careful what you ask for. Because you may get results back that you completely were not anticipating, and now what do you do?
Yeah, okay. Anything else?
Yes, a compliment from Brandon. So thank you, John Brand and your CB, for the massive amount of time committed to this effort. This standard will be beneficial to create a place for stakeholders, restorers, property owners, insurers to all come to a common understanding of what is standard of care. Great work.
We certainly hope so. Thank you, Brandon.
Yeah. Thank you, Brandon.
And then there was an anonymous person letting you know that there was a misspelling on your presentation. Instead of gentle, it was gentile. So
that's all me. That's all me. I'm the worst speller ever.
I'm just so glad it was on the presentation and not the standard.
And Scott seems to have a lot of questions and comments regarding this. Is there a way that he can possibly get a hold of you or reach out to you to address some of the questions he has here? Because we are running out of time.
Yeah, how's that done, Millie? I don't know.
Absolutely, Scott. I will connect you with John and Bran. Happy to do that.
Fantastic.
And,
all right. Well, I would like to, this is probably the last opportunity. Well, maybe not the last opportunity, but one of the last opportunities that I would just like to thank, Millie and Brandon and all of that staff for their amazing ushering us through this process, and shepherding us is probably a better way to say that. They've been amazing to work with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll let me go back and address Scott's concern. I think if you read the forwards, Scott, you might get a better handle on how we're thinking about a lot of the stuff that you're asking about. There's these principles that we use to stick by to come up with how we wrote this standard. That should explain it, but
Yeah,
we're
we're
happy.
happy to talk to you about it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's been a long process, but the Millie's been terrific, and Brandon, Darren, Cheryl, everybody's been great, and I'm glad it's over. That's all I said. We had our peer review was a nightmare. It was 600 comments, and it had to go out 3 times. I think it was just
It was a test of our,
yeah.
fill in the blank.
Patience.
Yeah, that's one thing. Yeah.
Yeah. But
Well,
it made the document better. Okay, I want to say that. I'm not just complaining because it was hard.
Oh, no. It was
Anything that
well
made
worth
the
the effort.
document better was welcome.
excellent.
Yeah.
And Scott Thomas does say thank you all. So another positive comment. And I agree. Thank you guys for taking time out of your day to catch us up on all the new information regarding the S700. I do some of our trade shows here, and when I travel to different locations, I always get a lot of questions about the S700. So I'm glad I have something to tell them, and you can order it and you can purchase it on our standards page on our website. So it's great to be able to send somebody to or send our interested parties to go purchase that. So definitely get on that. If you don't already have it, you can purchase it on our website under the standards drop down. If you have any questions regarding the presentation or your continuing education credit, you can also reach out to me. My email address is my first initial G, last name McMahon, MCMAHON, at IICRCnet.org. You can always reach out to me. I'm always happy to help. And thank you also to Millie for coming out and taking time out of her day as well to help us out with the S700 information. Anything else that you guys have to add before we close it down?
John, you want to plug IAQ?
Oh yeah, we're going to be on the IAQ radio show tomorrow, doing the same thing at noon. If anybody subscribes to that, it's Cliff Zlotnick and Joe Hughes co-host. It's talk about industry stuff. It's very informative for people to go. I've watched many episodes. He's been doing it a long time. It's very good. And if anybody's an RIA member and they're going to be at the convention in April, we're going to have an hour. We're going to have a panel up there on the stage after the general session, and we're going to talk about the 700. And it's going to be Brand, myself, Cliff, and Mark Springer, who was very instrumental. I think we want to close by thanking Mark Springer for not only getting the IRA and the IICRC together, that he was very instrumental in that, and he also was very instrumental in getting it published.
Yeah, down over the finish line for sure.
Yep.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Lots more people are commenting. Thank you. And I echo those sentiments, and we'll go ahead and close it down. Thanks
All right,
again.
leave it there. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.